Welcome to Doc NYC's Friday Fix. I'm Tom Powers, the festival's artistic director, hosting from my home in Montclair, New Jersey. This is episode 3 of our weekly series, bringing you a fix of our favorite filmmakers. If you missed episodes 1 and 2, you can find them at the link below where it says more on Friday Fix. Before I get to our guests, let me offer some tips on your Crowdcast experience. I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat box on the side there and tell us where you're from. If you have nice things to say about our guests, please share them in your comments. If you experience video delay, go to the help menu in the top right and switch to compatibility mode. The best browser for Crowdcast is Chrome, and you can probably get a better connection if you close other windows. If we experience any technical issues, we'll try to notify you in the chat section or on our Facebook page. Usually we can fix any problems within a few minutes. This video will be recorded, so afterwards you can share the link for later viewing. Now let me get to our guests. So on the second part of the show, I'll be talking to Renee Tajima-Pena and Tsien about their 5-part series, Asian Americans, that's coming to PBS next week. But my first guest is Hao Wu. Hao grew up in Southwest China in the city of Chengdu. He came to the United States when he was 20 and has gone back and forth between the two countries ever since. He had a career in the tech industry that he gave up to make documentary films. I actually first met Hao through Tsien when he was completing his first film called The Road to Fame that Tsien was an editor on. So that film is about a Beijing drama school that's putting on a production of the Broadway musical Fame. And Hao was looking at the generation gap between China's youth and their parents. His next film, People's Republic of Desire, won the Grand Jury Prize at the South by Southwest Film Festival. That film looks at young people earning money as webcam personalities. They're singing songs and telling jokes to feed people's desire for connection. Both those films played at Doc NYC. His most recent film is a 40-minute short on Netflix called All in My Family. And that film, Hao is telling a personal story coming out as a gay man to his extended Chinese family. Many years ago, he had come out to his parents, but not to his grandfather or other members of the family. And when Hao and his partner Eric had kids, the question came up again. So let's watch the trailer to that.
In my Chinese family, love means worries.
在你是整个大家族唯一男孩，他们肯定更希望你是子女双全，工作找个好工作。
我可以继续给他们干。
工作要做。
But I was keeping a big secret of how different I truly was. 从来都没猜到过。
从来没听说过，这里我讲我们那个年代哈，没听说过这个概念，没有同性恋这个概念，我简直不晓得。
The more my mom objects, the more I'm determined to have the life I want.
我简直想不通，我说我那么乖个儿，要咋个的
？The son of a Chinese family can never run away from his past.
你这种情况，我是坚决反对的，不要小孩。
去我的时候就不要尽量让亲戚朋友他们知道。今后小孩长大了过后，怎样跟他们做交代，说实话。
Eric, are you bothered by all this? I think it's all part of being in a family.
So that was on when said that was last year, May 3rd. Let me in Hao Wu right now.
Hi, Tom.
Welcome. Hi, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Hao is joining us from Atlanta, where he and his family have been riding out COVID-19. Normally they're based in New York City. Hao, I want to ask you, in your film, I mean, since your parents treated your life so much as a secret, you know, what was their attitude towards you filming it and making a film about it?
I started filming them a while back, even before I quit my tech job and became a full-time filmmaker. Because I think, as a lot of young people, I used to think my parents were extra crazy. You know, they're very different. But now looking back, obviously, every young person thinks their parents were crazy. So I started, you know, just using a consumer camcorder, started filming that. So they got used to me having a camera around, because initially I just want to document some of the conflicts within a Chinese family without talking about me being gay or my plan to have a kids. But gradually, as our lives evolved, that the focus of the filming shifted. And then gradually, later on, once Erica and I decided to have kids through surrogacy, that's when I decided maybe I want to make a film about this.
Now, so your grandfather, who isn't really prominent in that trailer, but is a significant character in the film, he was in his 90s when you had kids, but still very alert. And he passed away recently. I'm curious, you know, after all the processing you had gone through, thinking about your relationship to him and to your family, you know, what did it mean for you when he passed away?
It was really hard. My grandpa was diagnosed with late-stage liver cancer right during the Chinese New Year. So right after China started locking down pretty much the entire country. So I went back to China very briefly for Chinese New Year, but just to visit my sister's family in Shanghai, and then came back to New York. And that time I thought my grandpa had a little bit more time. So I delayed the travel. By the time I wanted to go back to visit my grandpa, you know, China was already restricting travel from overseas. I had to go through 14 days quarantine. And it became, also I didn't want to bring any virus from New York potentially back to my family in Chengdu. So I decided not to go. And then I didn't get a chance to see my grandpa because he passed 1 month after his diagnosis. It was really fast. So it was really hard for me and for a while. But then I think the only comfort I could take from that is that he didn't suffer too much in the end.
So when the film came out on Netflix last year, I mean, Netflix isn't available in China, but you know, there are people in China who will watch it through VPN or you know, will BitTorrent shows there. Did the film reach your family circles at all in China?
Not nearly through to my family circle, but I think a lot of the young people in China, especially the LGBTQ community in China, have watched the film through some pirated form. In fact, okay, I shouldn't say this, but so I looked the other way if anybody wants to pirate that film in China, because recently, in the past couple of years, China has really clamped down on any kind of media exposure, even online exposure on LGBTQ topics. So I was happy people were at least able to watch this, even though, you know, there's official censorship, and also Netflix is not available in China at this point.
So I want to ask you about your recent experiences during COVID-19. I mean, you're working on a film about this right now, and you can't say anything more about it than that. But I want to acknowledge that you've been processing this as a filmmaker. So you were in China on the time it was emerging as a known thing. Can you talk about your experiences there and then your experiences in the U.S. You know, as this became a phenomenon?
Yeah, it was a roller coaster emotional ride for me personally, because both my parents have cancer now. So every year we take the kids back during Chinese New Year to see them. For me personally, it's very important because I do want my parents to watch the kids grow up. And I know they probably don't have that much time left. So we made the plan to go back, take the kids back to China for Chinese New Year back in December. But then 2 days before our flight, China announced they are locking down Wuhan. So for a while, I was talking to Eric every hour. It's like, what does this mean? Does it mean it's under control, or does it mean it's out of control? So the government had to resort to such drastic measures. So 6 hours before the flight, we finally decided not to take the kids back. I flew back by myself to see my parents and my sister's family. So in the beginning, I was really angry because when I flew back to Shanghai, everything was shut down. Everybody stayed inside. For the Chinese New Year, which is the most important holiday, nobody was visiting each other, and then you read all these news stories about what's happening in Wuhan, the epicenter. You know, doctors running out of PPEs, they're desperate for help. So a lot of my friends and I were sharing on social media is like, how could the government have effed up this whole situation? And coming back to New York. You know, for a while, I was like obsessed with finding out what happened in the beginning. Why didn't government do anything in the beginning? But then gradually, as the things started happening in the U.S., the situation in the U.S. became worse and worse. I was like, especially after once it hit New York, once I saw what's happening in New York, it kind of like shocked me that the same story is replaying almost. All over again in New York, that there's doctor story desperately asking for help, patients are not getting enough help, and also there are good stories as well, like volunteers risking their life to help each other. So now I'm like, I guess I'm become less and less angry. I'm more thinking about considering what are the common themes in terms of how humanity deal with such a big crisis.
We've all heard stories about rising cases of racism against Asian Americans. I'm curious what you've experienced or what you're hearing from others in the community.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning for a while, I read some cases, right? I mean, on social media, I thought it was a little overblown, but then it happened to me personally. One day, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, when I was still in New York, I was walking out wearing my mask. And then in the short span of 30 minutes, I got 2 different people glare at me and basically saying in a very harsh tone, what you're looking at, be careful yourself, watch out yourself, in a very threatening way. I live in Harlem. I always loved Harlem. I thought it was one of the most diverse, dynamic neighborhoods in New York. That kind of experience never happened to me personally, but then it hit me that New York was changing. My neighborhood was also changing with this pandemic. So it was really scary for a while, for a couple of days. Every day, I would think, do I even want to go out to take a walk around the block? Do I even want to go to the supermarket to buy some groceries? So it's really hard. But then I keep trying to keep reminding myself is that I shouldn't be scared. And, you know, we need to be out there supporting, helping each other, supporting each other, rather than being scared by some people who probably just got sucked into their own zone of racism.
Mm-hmm. And as you, I don't know how much lately you've been engaging with other community chats in the Asian American community, but you know, are you hearing other things, you know, sentiments of ways to counteract this or organize against it?
Yeah, there are different, I think, based on my knowledge, I think the community is organized in different ways. And there's one group who's really trying to document all the sort of racist incidents against AAPI online. And then there's another group of new immigrants who are really trying to show they're patriotic by very publicly announcing the volunteering efforts they put in to support, for example, like procuring PPEs from China to support doctors and nurses and medical professionals in the hospitals here. And also, I think we're just reaching out to help support each other, to cheer, to encourage each other not to be afraid.
Before I bring up Jean Shen and Renee, I want to ask about your experiences with Jean, because you recruited her to edit your first film, The Road to Fame, and Jean is someone who's so much a mentor in our community. I wonder if you could reflect on your experiences with her.
Yeah, I think Jean, getting to know Jean was one of the most difficult courtship I've ever had in my life. Once I decided to become a full-time filmmaker, I moved to New York and then was looking for an editor. And then, I had watched Jean's film for a while. I really admired her work. So yeah, just through a friend, I got introduced to Jean. I have to really ask her out, try to find opportunities to meet her and public events like Stranger Than Fiction. So saw her there a couple times. So I think Jean, in the end, just decided to work with me just because I was such a hassle. I was always there. But in the end, we became really good friends. She's almost my fairy god sister. She's been helping me throughout my career. Every film, she's either helping with the edit or EP in the film. So yeah, anytime I have a new idea, I just throw it at Jean. Say, Jean, do you think this is a good idea? Is it worth pursuing at all? So we become really, really close. I'm so happy that I was tenacious enough, to have won her friendship.
Well, thank you for being with us. I hope for any viewers who haven't seen All of My Family on Netflix that they go and watch it. It's really a worthwhile experience. So we look forward, perhaps next year to hearing more about whatever you're working on now.
Okay, great. We'll do that.
Okay, I'm going to let you go. Take care.
Okay, thanks. Thanks,
bye.
Okay.
Okay, so let me call up our next guest. Invite them on screen. Give me a second. You're just invited. Renee. Invited you. Hello, Jean. How are you?
I'm good.
So Jean is in Flushing, New York.
I'm in my mom's basement.
Oh, there I am.
And there's Renee joining us from Los Angeles. So thank you both for being here. So let me just say a few words to introduce them. They're two members of a large team that produced the new 5-part series, Asian Americans, that's coming to PBS next week on May 11th. It's been years in the making, but the timing seems really poignant right now to counteract the rising racism that we're seeing. Both Renee and Jean have long credit lists. I'll start with Jean. She got started in the 1980s with the film Who Killed Vincent Chin that she made with Christine Choi.
Oh, that was me.
For an Oscar.
That was me.
I'm sorry with Renee. I'm sorry.
Okay.
This is Renee I'm talking about. So Renee and Christine, when they made Who Killed Vincent Chin, they were delving into really a horrible case in my hometown of Detroit, where a Chinese American man was beaten to death by white auto workers. That hate crime was stoked by a feeling that Japanese cars were causing Americans to lose jobs. Vincent Chin's killers were let off on probation by the judge. But that incident caused Asian Americans to really organize in a new way. And this story also comes up in the PBS series on episode 5. Renee's other films include the 1997 road trip, My America, or Honk If You Love Buddha. And the editor on that film was Jean Shen. So let me talk a little bit about Jean. She's one of the most respected editors working today. She's worked on multiple projects for Barbara Koppel, among other great directors. She's also edited many important Chinese documentaries, including Please Vote for Me and Plastic China. Most recently, she was the editor for The Apollo about the famed Harlem Theater. So welcome to you both. I'm going to talk about the new series in a minute, but first I want to hear a little bit about your careers that brought you to this point. So Renee, let me start with you. Since the series Asian Americans is such a story about immigration, can you give me a quick version of your family history in the US?
Oh, we've been here forever. I mean, my grandparents started coming in the early 1900s. I have one grandfather came to cut sugar cane on a plantation in Hawaii. The other one came to study theology at Yale. And, you know, like typical Japanese American story, our families all ended up in concentration camps during World War II. So that's our early history in a capsule.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you were making Who Killed Vincent Chin in the 1980s, can you describe what you witnessed of the way that case galvanized a new wave of activism?
Yeah, you know, I had been involved as a student activist. I started the film really just a few years out of college. I'd been a student activist in the Asian American student movement. And so there'd been these, you know, incredible, like the San Francisco State Strike that we tell the story of in the series. There's been always a lot of activism. In fact, you know, in the 1860s, the biggest labor strike in the United States was mounted by Chinese immigrant railroad workers. But the Vincent Chin case just sparked a whole new kind of wave of activism of people who previously thought that, you know, they had made it in this country. And then when the case happened, you know, they really reflected on, well, this is my experience, if I'm honest with myself, has been really different. I've been an outsider. And they were so outraged by what happened. So it just really expanded the Asian American movement in different directions.
Jean, let me bring you in. Can you describe your family's story of coming to America?
Well, my parents, they were born in China. And when the communists came, they all went to Taiwan. And I also just learned actually the last trip I had with my father, he told me he came to America because he was bankrupt in Taiwan. And out of all business was plastic business, you know, so very ironic. I worked on plastic china. So, and when he came, he was a businessman. So how does he want to get into America post 1965? You have to have a special skill. I don't think he was a real cook, but he came as a Chinese cook. And so he got his green card in 1970. And the rest of us came, you know, it's the typical immigration story. I didn't see him for about 5 years. You know, I was in kindergarten when he went to actually Canada first, then America. So, and then the rest of us came, my two brothers and my mom.
Wow.
And then we moved to the Bronx in 1972.
And when you were coming up into film, I know you were in the peer group with Ang Lee and other Asian American filmmakers of that kind of 1980s wave of independent filmmaking. Can you talk about the community amongst Asian Americans in the film world at that time?
Actually, when I was in college, that's where I met Ang Lee, and Jenny Yang, the producer out in LA, she wants to produce a film called East to West. And so we have 6 Chinese filmmakers. There was, Ang Lee was doing the sound, and I was doing the assistant camera. Eric Lau was doing, was the DP. It was probably the first, I would say, or not even Asian American, I would call it a Chinese American crew. We went across country. And none of us know what we were doing. And at the end of that 5-week shoot, I just say, this is not what I want to do. So I pursued editing. I took an editing class at NYU. And I just fell in love. And then in 1985, I got my first paid job at CBS Reports with Bill Moyers. And Sally Menke was my editor. And that's actually was the first time I really learned about the power of documentary. You know, with television audience, you could reach millions. And also that's actually, you know, I think there's a saying that you train a soldier for 100 days to fight for one battle. And beginning of that seed at CBS Reports, I learned about the importance of journalism. You know, it's like, this is during the Westmoreland case. So my first day as an assistant editor, they threw me this big news standard book about how, you know, what you have to tell the truth. And then in 1987, I watched Ice on the Price on television. At that time, it was like PBS. There was no VCR. And I was so moved and inspired. And I also didn't know about civil rights movement. You know, we never taught that where I was growing up in Taiwan and even in America. So after that, I was so inspired. And then 5 years later, I was so fortunate. Orlando Bagwell, one of the original producer for Ice on the Price, called me to edit Malcolm X Make a Plane, also produced by Blackside. So I felt that everything that I picked up along the way as an editor, as an assistant editor, it was all preparation for this series as an executive producer.
Well, Renee, how did you and Jean meet before she worked on your film?
I was a little luckier than Hao that she was younger when she edited My America or Hawk If You Love Buddha. Was it hard to get you?
No.
It's always hard to get Jean.
I was out of job at the time.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Because
that's why
I didn't know how to use the Avid.
Oh, and we cut that on film.
Yes.
All right, so let me move to your new project, Asian Americans. I've got the trailer here. Let me, here, I'm going to bring that up bigger, and then we can watch that.
I'm here today, so the rest of this world hears our story. For 4.5 years, my family was incarcerated. The government framed it as an issue of loyalty.
Many people lose everything. The Asian voices were so inspirational.
They had to assert their rights.
The railroad could not have been built without the Chinese.
We fought on the side of the United States. There was a shift in political power.
Asian Americans were free to do anything they wanted. All hell broke loose.
The city burned.
They were trying to build a life for themselves.
I grew up with the American dream.
You've got young people fighting to make change happen. If a lot of people put their mind to it, they can win.
It was an incredible time.
And their legacy belongs to all of us.
This is our story.
Okay, so there's a big team behind this series. We could fill up this frame with many other great filmmakers, Grace Lee, Gita Ganbir, and so many others.
Leo Chang.
Leo Chang, who participated in this. Renee, can you describe how the project came together in the first place?
You know, it's actually when our first staff meeting, I remember Jean was burning sage and remembering, she said, let's remember our ancestors, like not only the people who are going to be on screen, but the people who like made it possible for all of us to have our careers. And one of them was Lonnie Ding, who was the godmother of Asian American documentary filmmaking and helped to found the Center for Asian American Media. And she mentored so many of us and trained us and inspired us. So, and years and years, decades ago, she started a series called Ancestors in America. And I think in a lot of ways, we are finishing. She was never able to finish that series, but we're finishing Lonnie's work. So I'm going to take it all the way back to Lonnie, because that's why many of us are here. The kind of other story is we've been wanting to do a series like this for many years. Never were able to get it off the ground. And Jeff Bieber from WIDA, who had done Latino Americans and Italian Americans and Jewish Americans, I had worked with him before, and he approached me and Don Young from CAM, and he said, let's do Asian Americans. And this was way back, like about 7 years ago. And we said, yeah, we've been waiting for this. And, to have WIDA, which is the flagship station, as a partner would, we thought, oh, it can finally happen. So that's how it got started. It took a while to develop it, raise the money, get the team together, but we did it, and it's on air on Monday and Tuesday.
Jean, can you talk about some of the highlights of the series to you, like interviews that stand out or stories that you're really pleased got into this?
There was so many highlights, but first, actually, just to go back to Renee's film, My America, or Honky Villa Buddha. Before them, as an immigrant, I don't think about identity. I think it's a different experience. But when I was working with Renee in 1995 on My America, that was the first time I really think really hard about Asian American, my identity. And it's an ongoing, not a struggle, but just I think it's an ongoing thing in a lot of our lives. So I learned so much just of like Asian American, like the Filipino stories. I worked on the Last Caesar. Wait, the Caesar's
last
feast, right?
Fast.
Yeah. And so I always thought that Delano strike started with the Mexicans, but not knowing was started with the Filipinos. That's just one small example. And to be actually for the shoot of episode 1 to be on May 10th, 150 years ago, that's where the Golden Spike happened. And I was there on the shoot. So in the very early 3 o'clock.
This is the Golden Spike when they were building the railroad and the railroads connected in Promontory, Utah, the last spike driven in.
That's right.
So much of that labor, of course, in the West had been by Chinese Americans.
Yeah, so before the shoot, it was like 3 or 4 early in the morning, we wanted to do a drone shot. So I ended up at the Chinese Arch. Right there was, the crew was setting up. I just walked towards the arch and I just prayed for my ancestors. And just to touch the ground and touch the rocks, it was really profound. And there's just so many moments. And to learn, the first dreamer was Teresa Lee. Who knew? I only working on this series, it was like a masterclass in Asian American studies that I never have a chance.
The story you're referring to, Teresa Lee, was a piano player who had come to the country as a kid, brought by her parents, and learned later she was undocumented, and her Senator Durbin was so moved by her story, he tried to get this legislation passed, the DREAM Act legislation. She tells the story how she was prepared on September 11th, 2001 to go down for the signing of this legislation. Of course, it got delayed because of September 11th, 2001 and never got signed. That story is told in episode 5 of your series.
And that wasn't only Dick Durbin, it was also Orrin Hatch, believe it or not, who's a Republican senator, co-sponsored it. I mean, it had incredible bipartisan support, the DREAM Act. It was going to be, George Bush was going to sign it. Teresa, who's a Korean immigrant, was going to play the piano for the Senate. But then after 9/11, you just couldn't get any pro-immigrant legislation through. But it was Teresa. And actually the fastest growing population of undocumented immigrants are Asian immigrants.
Now, let me ask you, because the show is representing the experiences of so many different ethnicities: Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Filipinos, South Asians, Southeast Asians. Each one of them would be worthy of their own series. Could you describe why it was important to you to look at them as a group, and what the challenges were to doing that?
I'm going to let Renee answer, but
okay, I'm looking at Jane.
But to tell an Asian American story, 150 years in 5 hours. Imagine. My hope actually for the future is this is just planting the seed that the younger generations will take our story and expand it into. There's so many short stories could just expand into a whole feature length, and so this is just the beginning.
Yeah, and why? I mean, we identify as being Asian Americans. Some people ask, well, Filipinos, South Asians, Southeast Asians, are they really Asian Americans? And yes, I mean, if you look back into the history, we've all been treated as being the same. I mean, we have these amazing parallel histories. One thing that Leo Chang in the first episode, which is the early history, like late 1800s, early 1900s, I mean, he starts that episode with a Filipino story. Antero Cabrera, who was like a kid brought over from the Philippines to be displayed in a human zoo with 1,000 other Filipinos at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. And then he tells the story of Moksad Ali, because they're South Asian, mostly men who are coming over as laborers and as like good silk traders, peddlers. Moksad was Muslim from the Bengali region of India. And because of anti-miscegenation laws, no Asians can intermarry with whites. I mean, very few women from Asia were able to immigrate. So they settled down on the West Coast in often Punjabi Indian men settled in Mexican American agricultural communities, married Mexican American women. And these Muslim silk traders often went to, they settled in Harlem, Detroit, New Orleans. Moksad went to New Orleans, married Ella Blackman, an African-American woman from Treme, and they had this, amazing mixed-race family. And Leo actually, with Vivek Bald, a filmmaker and scholar who had found this family, went down to New Orleans and found the descendants who were, just really had been just discovering that they were not only African-American, but they were also an Indian family.
Yeah. Jean, you talked about your past being inspired by Eyes on the Prize and working on projects with Black Side. There's different touch points in the Asian American series, looking at the unity and disunity between Asian Americans and Black Americans. Can you elaborate on why that's such an important part of the story?
Yes, actually, the funny things I always tell people, I'm a Black editor before I was an Asian American editor. I worked on Scottsboro, Malcolm X, Travis. And so I learned so much about the history just because of my work. But most of the immigrants, parents, they never understood that we actually benefit so much from the Black experience in America, the civil rights movement, And so in episode 5, if you look at from Vincent Chin, how Jesse Jackson came on and tell we need to build a rainbow coalition. And in episode 5, there's also Gita Gandhi did a great job with the LA 92, which was a very difficult time for the Korean Americans. It's important also just what we're facing now with the pandemic. I mean, what Hao say about the racism, I'm also experiencing that, and I'm sorry, this phone. So it's more relevant today to really come together as Americans than just the different colors.
I mean, since you brought that up, I was going to ask you about that in a minute, but let me pick up on it now from either of you, to reflect on what we're going through now, what you're seeing in the community or experiencing yourself.
To expand on what Jean was saying, I mean, right now, a lot of the anti-Asian hate, it's not just like white people going after Asians, it's the people of color are involved in a lot of these assaults. At the same time, we've been grappling in the Asian American community and our own families quite often with a lot of anti-Blackness, a lot of prejudice of our own. And, what Jean was saying is this is really a time when we have to build solidarity. I mean, it's been going on for decades and decades and decades. I mean, we cover that story in the series, like, Patsy Mink in 1960 demanding that at the Democratic National Convention that they stay firm on civil rights, and how the Black students at San Francisco State College like really started this movement for ethnic studies that Asian Americans also joined. But the narrative has always been the tension and the conflict, and we wanted to change that narrative and show where, like Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition in support of the Vincent Chin case, show those points of solidarity over this entire history. I mean, Frederick Douglass denounced the Chinese Exclusion Act because he said it was racist, and the rot of racism afflicts us all. So, and that's true today. So we really got to figure out, we've been talking about it during this time, but we got to figure out how we're going to actually join together and really, move forward.
While we're talking about this, I want to point out, I see Ursula Liang in the chat comments here. She has a new film that premiered at True False called Down a Dark Stairwell, which is a case where
Peter Leon.
Where an Asian New York police officer had shot and killed an unarmed Black man in New York's housing projects. That film is going to be on the online version of the Human Rights Watch Film Festival in June. So people whose ears are pricking up at this conversation, I'd encourage you to look out for Ursula's film, Down a Dark Stairwell. In your series, we hear the phrase model minority come up, and it's a tricky label to throw around. I mean, I wonder if you can share what you hear, your thoughts around this label, model minority.
I know I was never a model minority with my that academic work. So
I know it's like the whole team is, part of it is personally, none of us were model minorities, I think. But it's a real dangerous idea, and it's something that started, as soon as we started coming to this country. I mean, there was this saying back in the 1800s that one Chinaman equals two Negroes, because there was, the racial hierarchy that was constructed at that time where you have whites on top, blacks on the bottom, and Asians fulfilling different gradations in between, which is something the Jeff Chang, the writer, really talks about a lot, that in-betweenness. And this idea that Asian Americans are a model minority has been used as a wedge against other people of color. It's like, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, shut up, don't complain, and just do what the Asians do, which has never been true, but that's been the narrative. And you really saw that starting to happen during the Cold War in the 1950s. And we have the story of Toylan Goon, who was named the, American Mother of the Year and like the symbolic model minority. But the two things that are going on at that time was one, China, Vietnam, and Korea had fallen to communism. And second, the civil rights movement was really, really surfacing. And so this idea of a model minority as being, you know, the good Asian versus the communist Asian, and the good American, you know, versus these other Americans who are marching in the streets, it became like this, you know, real symbol. So it's and it's used today. It's used today in affirmative action fights. It's used all the time. And a lot of Asian Americans, I mean, if you're going to be anything, you know, a lot of people would choose to be, you know, take on that cloak of the model minority. But, you know, it's a real dangerous idea.
Jean, you were starting to say before about things that you've experienced or witnessed during this time of COVID-19. You're in Flushing, New York, which is a densely populated, largely Asian neighborhood. So can you share what you've been experiencing?
Sure. You know, so in mid-February, actually, this is before the lockdown, I was, you know, Queens, as you know, the subway is like so the most diverse in the world probably. And I was sitting on the subway and then minding my own business. And then this woman who sat next to me all of a sudden just jumped and just ran across to the other side and just started giving me this most hateful stare. And it was very sad for me because it was an African-American woman, an elder African-American woman. What I felt bad about was I knew what Jim Crow era was like. All of a sudden, I felt that, you know, this is what they would experience, and now it's my color of skin. And this happened again a second time on the same train in mid-February. And it, you know, I've been in New York City for 48 years. I live in the roughest neighborhood in the Bronx. Growing up as a teenager in Harlem, went to high school in Harlem. And I know how to deal with people on the street taunting me with ching ching chong chong, Bruce Lee, kung fu stuff. But that was long in the past. And I learned to just, you know, look down, don't engage. And, you know, but now with this, I really, it's like deja vu, but much, much more scarier, I have to say, because, I mean, for me, it was just a stare. But if you read the reports and see the news, there were so many bloody, violent hate crimes against Asian Americans all across the country, across the world, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's an image of an actual Asian American lynching in the film, which was an image that had never come across my way before, and it was you know, shocking, of course, but shocking because we don't know that history as well.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that is a message to Asian Americans that, you know, racism and racial violence is real. But at the same time, I would caution, you know, all of us from, you can take that lynching in the past or the Vincent Chin's story, but, you know, there are Akai Gurleys who, Ursula, that is documenting that story, Akai Gurleys and Ahmaud Arbery's like happening constantly, maybe every day. I mean, because Ahmaud Arbery's killing was on video. Think of all the violence, racial violence directed towards also Black and brown people that's not on video. I mean, we saw it, you know, in our own community with South Asians after 9/11. But so I guess I'm talking about more for East Asians. I mean, know that history not as a way of saying, yeah, it's happened to us too, but know that history to say, you know, we have to show up for other people of color who are being attacked in, you know, in like, those attacks are like on steroids. And, you know, now including Asian Americans, like the health disparities. I mean, I was reading today that actually in New York City, the biggest population of people living in poverty were Asian Americans. I was really surprised. Maybe I even kind of thought there was like a model minority, and yeah, there's also a lot of rich Asians, so I don't know what their doing, why they're not showing up for their own people. But
need a redistribution. So as I wind this up, I want to ask, when you were making this series, you must have been thinking about an Asian audience and also a non-Asian audience for it. Can you talk about how you worked through that balance?
Wow, that's a hard question. Well, Jeff Beaver, our PBS white executive producer, he will come in and sometimes say, well, what is the Harry and
no, Milton and Mildred or something like that. Milton and Mildred would not understand.
I actually appreciate whenever the red flag goes off for him, because the film is not just for us, it is for everybody. So that's where the balance, it's tricky and there's a lot of negotiation. But at the end of the day, I think we are very happy what we have accomplished.
And I would say that all of us, Jean and Leo and Grace and Gita, everybody makes story character-based films. So we decided, not to do kind of like an academic overview, but we would base it all in people's lives. And that is universal. I mean, that's what, you don't have to be Asian to look at some of the stories and say, well, that's familiar to me. That's, that's reflecting in the mirror of my own life. So that was our strategy too. It's storytelling.
Well, I hope that people get to see this series, Asian Americans. It's coming to PBS on Monday, May 11th. I really appreciate. And Tuesday.
Monday and Tuesday, yeah.
Actually, it's live the whole month. So if you miss it live, just streaming pbs.org for a whole month.
So I hope everyone gets to see it. I'm going to say goodbye to our guests, but stick around because I've got some other things to announce coming up. Thank you, Jean and Renee.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, I want to tell you about some other things we have coming up at Doc NYC. Our Doc NYC Pro is returning with a new online class later this month. You can access it anywhere in the world. The next session is on editing and finishing your film remotely. We'll be joined by Joe Burney from Postworks, Carla Gutierrez, the acclaimed editor of RBG, who's currently finishing a project by the same directors on Julia Child, Eric Johnson of Trailblazer Studios, and Doc NYC alum filmmaker Alyssa Namias. The class takes place over 2 days, but when you enroll, you can either watch it live or anytime at your convenience. The cost is just $10 for the 2 sessions. You get more information at the More on Friday Fix button. We did our first class a couple days ago that was on creating highly clickable content. That is also still available to watch. So check it out. I want to give a big thanks to our sponsor, IFC Films Unlimited. It's through their support that we can offer Friday Fix for free. The subscription site is home to great documentaries, dramas, and comedies. It's available in the US and Canada. You can get it on Apple TV or subscribe on Amazon Prime. Thanks to IFC Films Unlimited for their support. And wherever you are, for free, you can get Monday Memo. You can sign up to receive it at docnyc.net. We deliver you all the week's documentary news in an email. Next week, I'll be back with episode 4. We have 3 guests: Nadia Hallgren, who was a Doc NYC 40 Under 40 honoree 2 years ago. She'll be talking about her directorial debut called Becoming, about Michelle Obama on her book tour. Came out on Netflix this week. Then we'll have Mark Levin, the veteran director of films like Slam and Brick City. He has a new series for Quibi called I Promise, that looks at a grade school created with the support of LeBron James for underprivileged kids in his hometown, Akron, Ohio. And our third guest will be Nelson George, the writer and director who's brought many projects to Doc NYC over the years. He recently wrote 2 articles in Medium, one about his mother who has dementia and another about his father who died from COVID-19. Nelson is going to talk about the importance of hearing stories from our elders. And I think we have links to his articles on Medium if you click below, more on Friday Fix. You can also click below to RSVP for episode 4, and please tell your friends. This show has been recorded and will remain free at this link. I want to give a big thanks to the Doc NYC team, Sarah Moto, Caitlin Boyle, and Rafaela Nehausen. I want to wish a happy Mother's Day to all the moms in the audience, especially Rafaela, who's sitting here with me, and mother to our son, Bez. Finally, thanks to our guests, Hao Wu, Renee Tajima-Pena, and Jean Shen. I hope you'll make time to watch Hao's film, All of My Family, and make time to watch Asian Americans next week. And I hope you join us again next Friday. Be well.